Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to ACTOM's webinar on Draft IRP2023 Impact on the Manufacturing Sector. Before we start, a few webinar considerations. Attendees are reminded to ensure your volume is turned up on their device. Ensure you have a stable internet connection. This will ensure that streaming and audio will run smoothly. Attendees can ask questions via the questions panel located within the GoToWebinar control panel. By default, the control panel is located on the right-hand side of your screen. The chat function is reserved for webinar organizers and panelists to communicate with attendees. Attendees will not be able to chat with each other, however, are encouraged to ask questions. A recording of this webinar will be made available on the SAIEE YouTube channel, SAIEE TV. The registration link is in the chat box. Please register, it's free. And this webinar will also be listed under ACTOM's playlist. A certificate of attendance will be issued a few days after this webinar. I'd like to introduce you to our host for today and the SAIEE representative, Prof. Pat Naidu, who holds the position of visiting scholar in the Department of Mechanical Engineering Science and Professor of Practice in the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment at University of Johannesburg. He's a registered professional engineer and a specialist consultant in electrical engineering, electrical energy, and power systems. He is a fellow of the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers, a fellow of the South African Academy of Engineers, and a senior member of IEEE USA, and a member of the IET UK in Sigre in France. Over to you, Prof. Naidu.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome, colleagues. Thank you for your time this morning and for us to engage in conversation around a key subject called manufacturing, industrialization, and jobs. In terms of the question that we've posted on the webinar advert, is the manufacturing sector going to lose out again? And I think that's the answer we want to explore, given the publication of the recent Integrated Resource Plan version 2023. Before we commence with the webinar, I just want us to reflect on 2 points. First is the news as shared by BBC. And the news headlines goes as follows. Headline number 1, Europe's growth engine is spluttering. Can Germany's economy be revived? So something's happening in Germany that is of concern. It's an industrialized economy, and when Germany gets a bit ill, all of Europe gets a bit ill. The second news headline, Britain falls into recession ahead of national election. And a lot of questions around Britain and its strength economically and its challenges in terms of serving its society. And those two sort of caught my eye this past week. And then there's a lot more conversations going around both Germany and Britain. And if you follow the news, you will also pick it up. I want us to also reflect on the industrialized society that we are in, starting with Industrial Revolution 1.0, then on to Industrial Revolution 2.0, 3.0, and now into the present era of 4.0. As you know, the University of Johannesburg very much positioned on the IR 4.0 agenda, and we're having lots of deep conversations around how best we could leverage the strength of technology in terms of serving society. But in terms of reflecting and going back into history, there's a common thread that went along from Industrial Revolution 1.0 to present day 4.0. That common thread was steam, water made hot, and that steam was the carrier of energy. It was that steam that powered industrialization. And somewhere along the line, that steam is being displaced. And we see the displacement very, very visible at Eskom in terms of the thermal coal power station performance. You hear all the time, boiler tube leak, and the struggles around boiler tube leaks. So steam itself is what is being displaced. And as we displace steam, we are displacing industrialization. We in fact deindustrialization. We are deindustrializing ourselves. And in that process, we are losing off on the jobs and we're shedding the economy. So somewhere we're going to have to reflect on all these challenges and see best how we could bring the intellectual capital of the country to come forward and to guide us in terms of getting back onto our feet and promoting job creation, promoting economic growth, development, and prosperity for all. So with those introductory comments, I would like to welcome first the Chief Executive of ACTOM, Mr. Mervyn Naidu, to come and give us a perspective from the ACTOM end and take it further in terms of the conversations going forward. Let me hand over to Mervyn. Over to you, Mervyn. Thank you. Minx, you're going to introduce Mervyn or me?
You can do that, Prof. Naidu.
Thank you. I will do that. Thank you, colleagues. Mervyn is a professional electrical engineer. He's been with the ACTOM group for 22 years, and he's had deep experience over 3 decades in the overall industry in South Africa, both in the private sector and the public sector. He's currently the chairman of the Manufacturing Circle of South Africa and a non-executive director of SAIEE, the Steel and Engineering Industries Federation of Southern Africa. Mervyn's also actively involved in several corporate social investment initiatives. Welcome, Mervyn, and thank you for your leadership. Let me hand over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, Prof. Naidu and fellow panelists. It's indeed an honor for me to do this presentation today. So, so what I've done is I've prepared a high-level presentation just to talk through the key elements that Prof. Naidu's mentioned. But firstly, a brief introduction to ACTOM. So ACTOM is a Black-owned company. We're the largest manufacturer, solution provider, repairer, maintainer, and distributor of electromechanical equipment in Southern Africa. The company is 120 years old to date, and it has extensive experience both from a manufacturing and aftermarket repairs and services perspective.
Sorry,
so the
Mervyn.
product, yes, ma'am.
Can you just swap your display settings or duplicate your screen, because we see your presenter view, not presentation view?
Sorry about
My apology.
that. Is that better?
There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry about that. So the ACTOM business manufactures a whole range of products. I'm going to basically focus on the T&D segment in this slide, and here it basically illustrates a whole range of components that go from transformers to high voltage equipment to switchgear and associated products. So these are products we've supplied into the renewable energy sector in the various previous rounds of renewable projects, but also into general transmission substations as well as distribution substations used by Eskom as well as municipalities and associated industry. So whilst I put up pictures of the ACTOM products here, I think what's key to note is that this capability is by the general South African industry across a whole range of products from a manufacturing perspective. And it's important to note that I'd like to map out a South Africa Inc. perspective on manufacturing. So these are pictures of various boilers that's used in the generation of steam and typically used in biomass type projects as well. So these are manufactured locally and are manufactured by the sector for export as well. So I then go into a very key element that Prof. Naidu picked on, and that is on the economic growth of the country. And in order to understand, where the South African economy finds itself today, I think a very interesting economic slide to go on is that of gross fixed capital formation as a percentage of GDP. So what this slide basically shows over the past 15 years, what has capital investment been like in the country, and you see that it's gone from figures of close to 24%, it's dropped to just over 12% and has increased more recently. But the reality is, for an economy, we need to typically invest between 25 to 30% of GDP in capital investment. And what you see here is a general downward trend on fixed capital investment. And why is this relevant for manufacturing? For me, the issue is that manufacturing businesses, if there's no fixed capital investment, have a distinct impact where it impacts in terms of jobs, and I'll talk on that in the subsequent slide. I'm also going to touch on very quickly the social crisis that the country faces at the moment. This is an extract of the World Economic Forum report, which shows South Africa as one of the countries with the highest jobless rates globally. So as of 2023, it was sitting at about 36%. And this doesn't talk to the extended unemployment rate. So from a social perspective, we currently sit with a massive social crisis. And I'll touch on this element as I go through my presentation. So ACTOM firstly has extensive investments across its operations in 5 countries where we employ approximately 7,000 people. Load shedding has had a huge impact on our company, in that we've had to put invest in alternative electricity sources, but also in terms of water as well, because when we typically have extensive ranges of load shedding, it then impacts on reservoirs, and many manufacturing businesses have been impacted by the lack of water as well. So there's been a need to invest in terms of water availability as well. Manufacturing, by way of the nature of manufacturing, such that it's very capital intensive, overhead structures are quite high, and it requires very specialized technical skills. Factories in the sector have been facing excessive capacity over the years, where we've had a general lack of loading with stop-start type scenarios. And this has posed a major challenge for most manufacturing businesses in the country over the past 10 years. And what it's forced companies to do was, in some cases, to rationalize or implement short time, and that has been a distinct challenge in the sector. There's also at times been adverse commercial terms that have adversely impacted manufacturing, and that is an example when customers opt to pay on commissioning, when you're manufacturing a product that has a long lead time of, and it can typically be a year plus, then impacts on businesses. And we've more recently in the transformer sector seen one of our major manufacturers go into business rescue, the business that manufactures your larger transmission transformers. The key to such investments is consistent and predictable demand. So for me, when you look at a manufacturing factory with extensive people, extensive overhead structures, if you don't have consistent and predictable demand, it basically manifests in losses. And when you look at your more specialized equipment, like your larger transformers, over the past few years, businesses in that segment have been in a loss-making position, specifically in that area. Key talking points of the draft IRP2023, which I'm going to touch on. It follows firstly on the IRP2019, which included on the completion of Kusile, renewable energy, and new coal-fired power stations. The draft IRP2023 comes at the back of an energy crisis, where in 2023 we experienced a record of 332 days of load shedding. So what does this mean for manufacturing operations? When you face load shedding, you cannot run heavy equipment, and in many cases, you've got processes that require equipment to go over many hours. And when you have load shedding and it disrupts the cycle, it then has a distinct impact on a manufactured product. It can impact on the quality of the product in terms of the inability to get the required volumes of product out, and this has been a distinct challenge. Delays in investment in the previous renewable projects, that has resulted in a general decline in manufacturing, and that decline has basically led to companies. We've seen more recently the likes of ArcelorMittal basically looking towards the closure of certain plants. So the key thing in the manufacturing business is that predictable demand, and that you're able to load factories and sustain factories. If that's not in place, then it poses distinct risks in terms of sustainability of businesses. The loss of jobs and retention of scarce skills has been felt by the manufacturing sector. So when we had gaps in manufacturing over the past 10 years, it's led to many companies having to scale down, And in some cases, there's been many companies that have even shut down altogether because of the lack of loading in that. The delays have also resulted in major lost opportunities for capacity increase in the sector. So the sector, as I said, has been sitting with gaps, but also, there's been a situation whereby companies have held back on capital investment on expansion, and I think these delays have resulted in lost opportunities for SA at large. Yeah, the IRP2023 also talks to very modest projection of renewable energy projects coming on stream. It also introduces gas to power to the energy mix. Coal is still significant, and it also includes hydro storage and hydrogen. Considering that there's been a stop-start to REAP in the past, it is important that the following factors are considered as we move into the future. And I'm going to touch on the key elements here. Firstly, discipline of implementation of the program. So for me, I think the one thing that we've been lacking in terms of is that of being decisive and actually implementing programs. In many cases, there's been plans, but there's been a lack or delays in terms of implementation of those plans. And I think going forward, we really need to change that. South Africa has the opportunity with what is coming to reset our economy and the social crisis that currently prevails. Manufacturing has the ability to create jobs, increase our economically active population, and thereby stimulate GDP growth. So that's quite a mouthful, but when you reflect on this statement, South Africa as a country from 2000 and 2000 and between 2000 and 2008, I think created over 200,000 jobs. In the sector from 2008 to 2022, we actually lost over 200,000 jobs. So the point here is that we have the ability to create jobs given the right circumstances. The scale of investment required must aggressively be targeted towards maximizing local content and reindustrializing our country. Strategic, medium, and to long-term procurement framework is required, where we look at things from an SA Inc. perspective. So what I mean by making this statement is that I think going forward, what is critical for our country is that we use the demand that we do have and leverage off that demand, and then move towards basically strategic procurement models to maximize the saturation of capacity in these local factories. And I think that is required desperately for the country, but also in terms of making business cases bankable for investment to grow manufacturing in the country. The Integrated Resources Plan and the Transmission Development Plan, these both have major potential to turn around our country's jobs and economic crisis. When you look at the Transmission Development Plan, the need to build over 14,000 kilometers of transmission line and associated substations, then the need for the building of whether it be renewable projects, whether it be gas projects, whether it be hydro, and so forth, it has the potential of creating demand to turn around the current economic woes of the country. Another key issue is that of aftermarket considerations, and that is of repairs and services. And something I want to basically just touch on is when we reflect on the Transnet 1064 program. So it's so important that we learn from the mistakes of the past. And when you look at the Transnet 1064 program, what's happened there is, firstly, as a country, we manufactured locomotives in this country in the 1970s, 1980s, and a very small number in the 1990s. There was a huge gap, and when the Transnet 1064 program then was implemented, there was a lack of investment in terms of local manufacturing. So out of the program, I think virtually half of the program, the locomotives that we acquired were not localized. And what does this mean? It means, firstly, that we lost the opportunity to build capacity for local manufacture on the one hand, but more importantly, we lost also the aftermarket support for that locomotive fleet. And that's what's manifested in the logistics challenges that we see in the country today. And why is this relevant in the IRP? So for me, I think we need to reflect on this, and whatever we do on the Transmission Development Plan and the IRP going forward, we need to take on lessons learned from the Transnet 1064 program and make sure that we don't end up with mass imports to the detriment of the local manufacturing sector, but also to the detriment of the ability of being able to support the aftermarket repairs and services of these products. So what we need is continuous engagement with key industry and stakeholders for the benefit of SA Inc. I think as a country, we've got to take an SA Inc. perspective on what we're about to embark on in the IRP and TDP. When you look at the scale of what's required, and especially on the back of the point raised by Prof. Naidu in terms of recession in the UK, and I think there's also recession now in Japan, and you've got issues around the world. You know, I think for me, we're sitting with demand from a transmission perspective, from a generation perspective that has the ability to map out a sustainable industry in manufacturing for the next 10 to 30 years, provided we get our positioning right and use an SA Inc. perspective to maximize and saturate local factories. With that, I thank you for listening to me and look forward to my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Mervyn. Thank you. Well done. Thank you for that. Colleagues, let me remind all that you're welcome to post questions. If you may put it in the chat box, and we'll pick it up. And we'll take questions at the end of the session. So please post your questions. Let me bring on the second panelist to share with us her thoughts and experience. Philippa Rosette, who's the Executive Director of the Manufacturing Circle. Philippa is an architect, a banker, and a passionate activist in manufacturing. She became the Executive Director of the Circle in 2015, and again to give voice to the manufacturing industry of South Africa. She engages with key stakeholders, and she wants to power the economy using the engine of growth. And policy will follow, and we would then welcome her focus on the critical priorities for the sector itself. So Philippa, welcome, and as an architect, come and give us some guidance, bring the art and the engineering together. Thank you. Over to you, Philippa.
Thank you very much, Prof.
As you mentioned,
let me just get my screen to show. If you'll just give me 1 second. Show screen. All right, can that be seen by colleagues?
Yeah, just onto slideshow.
Okay.
There you go. Slideshow mode, and you're all set.
Right, thanks, Prof. As we said in the introduction, it's possibly a little bit of a confession to indicate that I'm an architect when I would assume we've got quite a large engineering audience. I certainly do value in this work as running the manufacturing circle, working with many engineers. I do think there's a lot of skills and ability to solve for problems, as I've seen in the work that I do working with engineers. So, Prof, I would like to just start by giving a little bit of a background on the manufacturing circle to those who may not be familiar with us. We're a voluntary industry association, and we represent different subsectors in manufacturing and different parts of the value chain, really with the objective of understanding what it is that we're trying to solve for across the industry, and really looking to key areas as far as where can we identify more opportunities to unlock demand side opportunities for the sector, and then to address supply side challenges. And on that basis, you know, I don't know of a manufacturer who doesn't have quite a long list of supply side challenges. Having a look at this membership base and the various logos of companies represented, there may be one or two things that
my apologies. Kindly go to slideshow and then move your slides. Sorry, they're not slideshow, and then on to moving your slides.
Oh, there we go, Prof. Thank you. Is
That
that
coming? Not
okay?
yet, not yet.
Presentation mode.
Presentation mode. At the
Yeah,
bottom, slideshow.
Okay, it is indicating presentation mode on my side. Let me just, is it still not?
No.
Oh dear. Okay, let me just try.
If you look at the bottom of your screen, Philippa, where you can plus and minus at the bottom right, just click on the presentation next to the minus.
Okay, I've done that.
Okay.
It does reflect my side. Should I stop showing and then show again?
Yes.
Yeah, try that. Try that. Yeah, try it again.
Let me just quickly take it back to me. Okay. There we go. Perfect.
There we go. Perfect. Perfect.
Need to reset. Okay.
You're on membership base.
All right. So yes, and there's a couple of things that may be apparent. First of all, we represent quite a few companies in the metals and machinery value chain. You know, from upstream all the way down to, well, various iterations along downstream, paper and packaging, pharmaceuticals. So as Manufacturing Circle, we don't attest to representing every single manufacturing company, but what we try to do is really solve for what we would call this microcosm of companies that really do reflect, I think, many of the challenges that most manufacturers are experiencing. The areas that we focus on, and again, this is context just in mapping out our thoughts, you know, as far as the IRP 2023 is concerned, and the question that we've been asked to talk to. So as far as the areas that we focus on, which really do impact on some, if not all, of our Manufacturing Circle member companies, relate to exports, energy, municipalities, and steel. And under each of those, there are specific projects that we're involved in, either on a collaborative basis or sort of leading, that would either look to addressing new demand side or how to access demand side opportunities, or how to address the supply side challenges. So for exports, we need to export products. Our current anemic is a diplomatic word. GDP growth in the country, it's minimal, and we don't have enough demand locally for our installed manufacturing capacity. Many of our member companies are operating well below maximum production demand. So being able to export is absolutely critical, and also what it means is that by exporting, and you know, much of industry is already doing that, by default there's an underpin of competitiveness, which is absolutely important and critical for us to remain as a sustainable sector and industry. I'll talk to energy last, because that's really where we are drilling down into in this conversation. Municipalities, we don't have a single manufacturer with a factory that is in a municipality and not experiencing challenges as far as electricity or water infrastructure. So there we're taking quite a focused approach in trying to solve for how industry can address service delivery challenges. We're doing a specific pilot project in City of Ekurhuleni, looking at the infrastructure assets across electricity substations, for example, or water reservoirs, What is it that needs to be fixed? How can industry do it in a way that enables the mandate to do so, you know, and interfacing with municipalities in that regard. So again, for those manufacturers that do supply products and services and solutions into that space, again, it addresses some business opportunities in that regard, but then also more important, well, not more importantly, just as importantly, dealing with the various supply side challenges. Steel, we have been very involved as a manufacturing circle in participating in the Steel Master Plan process for the last 18 months, specifically in chairing a demand side working group, again with the objective of identifying demand side opportunities and how to implement and unlock those. That process and how we engage as industry on specific areas we are busy working through, notwithstanding that the areas, and I'm going to come to in energy, as far as the grid and Eskom related transmission and distribution build programs remain very important. So that then brings me to our last but not least focus area, being energy. And again, you know, it's critical on both ends for our manufacturing companies. And there certain specific areas that we are focusing on have to do with renewables, the grid. Mervyn did mention the 14,000 kilometers on transmission line that needs to be built. That's not even dealing with the distribution aspects. And there also gas to the extent that industrial gas does it a couple of our manufacturing circle member companies, important from a landscape perspective. So moving on to whoops. So the point here, that this really indicates that across all of those areas, we've called them the strategic projects, they always focus areas for us in the work that we do, either how to access demand side opportunities or how to address supply side challenges. And this is an ongoing and iterative process. So you may note there that in 2021, we had a very focused electricity forum where we looked specifically at the relationship between electricity and the manufacturing sector, as far as the state we are in the way forward, how do we close the generation gap, moving towards renewables and manufacturing our future. So these are not new areas of importance and focus to us. And I think just before I get into sort of specific comments as far as the IRP or draft IRP 2023 is concerned, I want to just reiterate this SA Inc. approach that we apply to our work, which Mervyn did talk to in his presentation. In that, you know, really the investments that needs to be made as far as renewables is concerned, as far as augmenting our grid is concerned, it really does pose a window of opportunity for us to reindustrialize. And if we take that as the opportunity, and Prof also in his opening talked to, you know, this transition from a you know, an energy perspective and also economic perspective, it really is an opportunity if we play it right to see how we could benefit our sector and pivots in the process. And really the key aspect to that is this sustainable demand for our manufactured product. As manufacturers and as industry, I think we know it that fundamental principle very, very well. But so I sometimes think we need to reiterate again and again and again, because that demand and the prospect of saturating first local industry capacity to enhance economies of scale is absolutely critical. And it's something in our work in dealing specifically with Eskom and the Eskom and the Transmission Development Plan, we talk to again and again. Because really, and we all know it, economics do inform capacity, and often there's an issue in terms of capabilities exist, but capacity is a function of demand, and that takes time to ramp up the investments that Mervyn talked about. Which then, creates the virtuous demand cycle. Another thing that's also important to be mindful of, because we do acknowledge that we operate within, a global ecosystem and international supply chain. So it's not to say that, we're not mindful of that, but also that aspect of how international supply chains can integrate into local supply. And again, I think, Mervyn's example of the Transnet 1064 and locomotives and what we don't want to see happening again, where that integration of international supply chain, certainly as far as one of the service providers was concerned, did not transpire. And this, so again, talking to that position in terms of local products the international supply chains, looking at the importance of technology and skills transfer to create a local supply base. So, and really what this approach talks to is the importance of collaboration, that South Africa Inc. Let's say maxim that Mervyn talked to as well. And by that, because there's also often, well, what is the definition? And for me, it's really a practical approach to identify at an holistic country level, where are the demand opportunities? Where are the investment opportunities? How do we, across industry, government and labour, look to access those and make them happen in a practical way, so that we have a solution that can address our various challenges or solutions. It does require visibility into projects and the details, because otherwise it's sort of high level talk and planning. And again, engineers and industry and manufacturers, know quite a lot about that. And then that then enables the ability to create a certainty or predictability, which then informs those investments, which are long-term in nature. Mervyn's graph of the gross fixed capital formation and how that has decreased. It's a function of many things, including lack of certainty and predictability. And also targeted approach in terms of where are the areas that are important to focus on. And I think probably, the reason for today's webinar as well, in terms of energy and more specifically electricity, one of the many subsectors to energy, but the targeted approach in terms of where do we need to focus on, so that we can hopefully move the needle in terms of taking an opportunity for reindustrialization and investment, increase in manufacture, augmentation of skills, and increase in the jobs that we really do so desperately need. So how does all of this thinking apply to the draft IRP 2023? And there's been a lot of, I think, public comments in the media, as well as by various parties. And the comment that, or let's say the position or the thinking I would like to focus on for today's webinar has to do with alignment, or possible lack thereof, given the color of the text and the question mark. And the reason why I'd like to drill down on alignment is that we talk about collaboration, we talk about consistency, predictability, certainty, all of those aspects so important for manufacturing investment and growth, because these are significant investments that need to be made in terms of maintaining plants, growing developing factories, or new investments, which need to have an outlook for the foreseeable future. And for me, alignment is maybe one of the fundamental starting points to enabling all of those other good things. So really, as far as the three aspects that I've indicated on the screen, we do question the alignment between the IRP, the draft IRP 2023, and the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, which is in the process of being developed and hopefully launched soon, which really talks to an industrial development plan for renewable energy value chains by 2030. And broadly speaking, the IRP 2023 is not is less focused on renewable energy than we would have assumed or hoped. So that really talks to a potential misalignment. As far as just one last point on the SAREM, as the manufacturing circle, we have been quite involved in the various iterations of the development of the plan, which talks to the aspirational future targets as to gigawatts on the grid by a certain time and from that point onwards, which then also informs ability to work back and plan. So that's a document that's in process. It is ready for a final review and hopeful launch, but I'm sure the next speaker will probably talk a little more to that. Then also other questions regarding alignment have to do with how does the draft IRP 2023 align or talk to the climate change bill, which is really addressing a just transition and towards a climate resilient economy, and linked with that, the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, or JET-IP, that is being assessed and administered at the moment, that involves the provision by international parties of various grant and concessional finance to national treasury, South Africa's national treasury, also in relation to our decarbonisation efforts. So that, for me, I'd like to really just highlight those points in terms of alignment or questions in that regard, really as just I think some opening thoughts and statements around the draft IRP 2023. And then, Prof, if I may, I don't have a specific slide for it, but I'd like to talk in closing, so sort of where to now, because I also do feel that we know sort of often where there may be challenges or issues, but what is it? And I guess maybe talking from the hat of the manufacturing circle perspective, what is it that we can do to move forward, given the various challenges and the concerns regarding alignment as noted here, and I think maybe what I'd like to suggest is maybe an answer to the question of the webinar. We as manufacturing, we can't afford to lose out again. it's really not an option. But what is it that what do we do about it? And I think that you know, one of the focus points and areas is that certainly as industry, you know, and I talk to the broader industry, not just our you know, manufacturing circle members and industrialists, but we are and can be proactive. And I do think that manufacturers, broadly speaking, can make things, can fix things, and can make things happen. So to the extent that, you know, and I think this is probably the purpose of this webinar as well, to the extent that as industry we can be quite vocal as to sort of the issues or areas that we feel are problematic, and maybe also I'd say prioritize and highlight you know, what we feel is absolutely critical to address, is probably a first port of call. What I'd also like to just mention is that, you know, in these problem-solving aspects, I do think that a systems approach or systems thinking is quite important, you know, and I think that really talks to my comment here on the importance of alignment, because decisions that are being made in the IRP or policy positions that are being set, they all connect to you know, our other master plans or policy issues or possible funding that's going to come in. So this acknowledgement that we do operate in an ecosystem is terribly important, and that one decision, especially when our economy is you know, we're not seeing GDP growth, we're seeing lack of employment, is terribly important. And one of the and also this importance of implementation and action. And again, I would suggest that this is let's say a discipline or an area where industry is pretty good from a project management perspective in terms of identifying and mapping out, you know, if it's a project or possibly even a program, which becomes a bit broad. You know, what needs to be done, what are the people need to do what are the timelines, what are the critical path factors. I do think that industries could use that discipline in you know, where it is we want to sort of table or strengthen a certain position or voice. That's something that we could look at doing. And then maybe lastly, just to give an example of one of the projects that Manufacturing Circle, together with one or two other colleagues, we are looking at, which entails our grid project, to again look to mapping out how does this 14,000 kilometers of transmission line that need to be built, as mapped out in the TDP, Transmission Development Plan, which is quite a long list. How can that practically be rolled out, taking also into account the various independent power producers, because government is not the only off-taker of power and energy, and also private buyers. So that's you know, we can gladly share more of that in time as it develops, but we're really looking at a first instance to take the Transmission Development Plan and looking at developing that into a visible and user-friendly format, because you know, it reflects certain points in time as it currently stands, so that could then be used you know, as maybe to enable a scenario planning tool for the likes of IPPs, for off-takers, and also for manufacturers, in terms of looking at different scenarios and what that could mean for demand for product across transformers, pylons, conductors, etc., and you know, a little more detail in that regard. So I think, Prof, with that, I will close, thanking all colleagues and the forum for this opportunity to hopefully share some ideas and maybe a little bit of food for thought, and most importantly, what can we do, and you know, what is the way forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Philippa. Thank you very much. Excellent leadership. Colleagues, another reminder, kindly post your questions to Philippa on the questions chat box, and we'll pick it up when we complete the webinar presentations. Let me introduce Galo Montmasson-Clare, the senior economist from the Renewable Energy Society. Galo is a senior economist at the Trade and Industry Policy Strategies team that's facilitating the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. And again, this master plan is based on industrialization of South Africa on renewable energy and stored energy. Galo is a research associate at the University of Johannesburg Center for Competition, Regulation and Economic Development. Welcome, Galo, and we look forward to your thoughts on this subject. Over to you, Galo.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you again for the invitation. You know, Philippa talked about being an architect in front of engineers. I mean, you know, I'm an economist in front of engineers, so hopefully you don't grill me too hard. We do come from different worlds, but often have to meet and work together. So I'm hoping that you know, we find a common route. Hope you can adequately see my slide.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
So as introduced, I'm the facilitator of the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, or SAIEE for short, which is a social compact process between government, business, and labor, focused on developing the renewable energy and battery storage value chain in the country. So really focused on the industrial development opportunities. And it is, of course, premised on significant demand for renewable energy and battery storage technologies. And so I will spend a little bit of time highlighting some of the key considerations that we have been putting forward through the master plan process, which, as Philippa indicated, is at the sort of finalization stage, and we are hoping to be in a position to launch very soon with social partners. Well, the first thing that we have to reflect on when building an industry, and again, it has been pointed out by the two previous speakers, is that if we want to build an industry going forward, you know, we need consistent demand, and that has to be annual consistent demand. And if we look back, you know, it's been a bumpy ride. You know, we've had some ups, but we've had some downs. You know, years of no demand, particularly I must say in the wind industry, it has been difficult. Solar, of course, has a more diffuse demand profile and can capture other markets, and as such is having less of a hard time. But you know, that is really critical. Continual, ongoing demand is the crux, and that, of course, what we are looking at when we turn our attention to energy or electricity planning. Going forward, you know, we're hoping that recent reforms are going to enable that ongoing profile. And if we look at on the left-hand side of your screen at the private sector projects that have been registered with NERSA, the energy regulator, we clearly see the impact of the regulatory reforms in August of 2021 and December of 2022 that first increased and then removed licensing requirements. And we can see then how things just spiked very quickly, particularly in the first quarter of 2023, a bit of an exceptional quarter, not necessarily the norm, but certainly you now see between 500 to 1,000 megawatts of projects being registered per quarter, and that is really a clear change compared to the ecosystem prior to 2022, and that has really been translating into increased projects from the private sector. We see that in some of the Eskom data that really show the rise of private sector solar, but specifically in the course of 2022 and 2023, and we see that now totaling really I think it's 5.2 gigawatt, which is almost as much as the utility scale renewable energy, which sitting at about 6.2. So really now that realization that we have multiple markets. We have a large scale market driven by the public sector, but also now key anchor players in the private sector, particularly of course mines, but also a residential sector and a small scale market in shopping malls and small businesses, but also in the public sector with rollouts on government buildings and so forth. So a really interesting trajectory in terms of the demand profile going forward. We also see that in what is currently my favorite graph, which is the imports of solar panels, lithium-ion batteries, and inverters into South Africa. And as I always say, this graph gives me mixed feelings. First, I'm always quite happy to see that we're seeing a rise in the sector, and that we see renewable energy taking off. Of course, this is just three products: solar panels, lithium-ion batteries, and inverters. Many more things go into solar systems, and of course there are other technologies. But it does depict again that sort of massive spike that we've seen in the registration. It was in Q1 of 2023. Imports correspond in Q2 of 2023, before going back to some sort of new normal in Q3, and we expect Q4 to be relatively similar to Q3. But of course, then I am reminded that these are imports, and when we look at the numbers, Q2 of 2023, close to $2 billion imported. There's a staggering numbers, and so here is an opportunity to, of course, tap into a new market. We also see that with the deepening of our trade deficit in some key components, and we see that in this graph with lithium-ion batteries very clearly, but also inverters and panels. But interestingly, it held up a lot better on the transformer side. So it's interesting to see that again, as demand goes very quickly, we are struggling to respond because of that historical effectively imbalance. These graphs effectively reemphasize the same point. They really show the challenges with the sort of stop-start nature of the industry. It's staggering on the wind side, with the import of wind turbines going up all the way down to zero in 2018, but also in 2022 and virtually zero in 2021. Solar side, as I said, a similar pattern, of course, doesn't go all the way back to zero because there's different demand streams, but we see the spike again in sort of 2023, and then the ability to have some consistent demand that doesn't keep going up and down is really critical for industry going forward. So as far as the master plan is concerned, we're very clear that there's a wide range of opportunities, which I'll get into, but that we need a minimum rollout of renewable energy of 3 gigawatts per annum. And that is a bare minimum, of course. We hope this can ramp up to 5 gigawatts per annum by 2030. And that, of course, if we achieve more than that, you know, some studies show a need for 6 to 8 gigawatts of renewable energy per year, then that would enable even further local industrial development. But we're very clear as far as the SAIEE team that, you know, this is what we need as a country to build the industrial development component. And here, let me be clear, we're asking a very different question that the one of the IRP. You know, the IRP clearly is looking at what do we need to achieve energy security as a country. It's not, you know, the mission of the IRP or the mandate of the IRP to enable industrial development. But from SAIEE perspective, this is what we're putting forward as the demand that we need. Of course, there should be, as Philippa highlighted, some alignment between the two. And given the low cost of renewable energy technologies, you know, we would expect a high degree of alignment between the two processes. We're also very clear that, you know, there should be stable demand, and I cannot emphasize that enough if we are serious about industrial development. But demand is not all. Manufacturing of renewable energy and battery components is very competitive globally. And if we look at the experience of other countries, it is very clear that building an industry in this sector requires some ambitious supply side support. And so if we are serious about realizing our vision, which is to industrialize the renewable energy and battery storage value chain, then we need to support our supply side through industrial policy and other support measures. Now, we need to obviously have a discussion around the broader ecosystem, particularly around capabilities, skills, but also technology readiness. And so this is the house of SAIEE. Those that are familiar with master plans know that there's always a little house, and that shows our key pillars: supporting demand, driving industrial development, fostering inclusive development, of course, driving the transformation of the sector is critical, and building the capabilities, particularly in skills and technology development. Briefly, this is the value chain that we focus on in green, and you can see that, of course, it is part of a broader ecosystem. Now, we are focusing as part of SAIEE on key inputs as well as key technologies and systems, and manufacturing-related services like testing, certification, R&D, and skills development, as well as the balance of plant on the civil side and the electrical, and the end-of-life management, of course, ensuring that circular approach and the overall sustainability of the sector. But of course, there's a broader ecosystem in terms of critical infrastructure, mining, but also the more demand side on project development, you know, policy and regulations of transmission and so forth. That is interconnected, and that SAIEE very much depends on. But we have to, of course, point to our mandate, which is about building the existing components and you know, in the value chain. Of course, this is a summary. It's not comprehensive. There are many other components as well, but it does provide a good idea of where we think things can move to. There is, in addition, an ecosystem of manufacturers that we can build upon. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. There may be others, but it shows that across the solar PV value chain, the wind energy value chain, and the battery storage value chain, particularly lithium-ion batteries, but also vanadium redox flow batteries, we actually have great capabilities. You know, and we have a number of companies that are operating in the space and that have been doing so for a number of years. No doubt, it has been a bumpy ride. We've lost some along the way. This could have been averted, and it could be more. But we still have great capabilities on which to build across quite a wide array of components and parts and systems and expertise. And so that gives us comfort that there is an ecosystem which can be leveraged and that we should effectively support and grow. So what are the key opportunities that we look at? We've clustered them into 3 key groups. First one are, I'd say, the no-brainers. We call them big wins. The ones where effectively we already have capabilities. It's been demonstrated to be very or relatively competitive, and we can really build those a lot further. And they also bring some great degree of socioeconomic benefits. And so if we can have that 3 to 5 gigawatt demand per year, then that would be enabled effectively to grow and really drive effectively the industrial development of the value chains. We also have another area of opportunities where we're very competitive, but this tends to be maybe smaller components, smaller part of the value chains, and we should still, of course, pursue them because we're competitive, we have an existing industry in most cases, and we can grow it. But we have to acknowledge, of course, this sometimes are smaller industries, but they are still, of course, very much part of our drive to industrialize. And then here's a group which we've characterized as high stakes, high reward. It's not a done deal. It would take quite a lot of effort to develop those industries locally, but if we do, they would bring some substantial rewards and some substantial benefits. And that's things like lithium-ion battery cells, the solar cells, maybe nacelles for the wind industry and so forth, which we have to acknowledge we do not have right now as industries, but we could look to develop. There's of course others that are not necessarily on that graph, particularly in the end of life management. These have not been listed yet because it's so unclear to what degree this could be competitive, and we're still doing further work to understand what can be developed. But effectively, there's a wide array of opportunities that we could look at. And so what is SAIEE putting forward? Very, very briefly, market demand is, and I cannot repeat it enough, the crux. And of course, this is where then we look to processes like the IRP to provide that clarity, clarifying the market. What is the pipeline of both public and private demand that we can expect over the next few years? You know it better than me. To set up operation, you need a pipeline potentially, of at least 5 years, some clarity on the market. And that's really important that we're very clear as a country to establish that. We need to sort out our physical and market infrastructure. That is our grid, but also our infrastructure to trade and wheel energy, and make it easy to invest. And that is, of course, the purpose of the Energy One-Stop Shop that has been established under the DTIC. And then there's a whole suite of things that can be done to support that, around energy security in industrial parks, energy resilience scheme that provides support and finance for those that are trying to develop projects, but also rolling out renewable energy across government buildings, for instance, as well as unserved or underserved communities. It's really important. Then we need to build the capabilities. I've said it, it's about the skills. We need to map, build, and activate the skills. Make sure that we have the right skills to build the industry. And here, the Power platform that has already been established, actually, and we're further developing, which is a matchmaking mechanism between industry and education providers, helps to make sure that whatever comes out of the training and education institution is actually what the industry needs, and vice versa, that there is a pipeline effectively that can be utilized by those that come out of the system to jump into the labor market. We need to activate the skills, that's clear, create more opportunities, but also we need to be technology ready, and that is critical. We have a number of pockets of excellence, but beyond those, we're not necessarily looking to be at the cutting edge of R&D. So we need to be very quick in adopting new technologies. And here, de-risking mechanisms, are critical to make sure that trials can be sorted out as effectively as possible. We also need to have an OEM-led cluster platform to make sure that we actually bring the whole value chain along and really just drive effectively the supply chains and new entrants, particularly, and emerging suppliers into capabilities. Then we have a core of SAREM, which is around industrial development. The core of SAREM is about being clear on our supply side support. And here, industrial policy and industrial policy programs, specifically around localization, critical. We are putting forward a case to reactivate the 12I tax incentive, which provides support for both greenfield and brownfield investment in manufacturing, with a focus, in our case, on renewable energy and battery storage. We also think that demand from the public sector, however it is supported, should come with a degree of localization, and that could be direct procurement, but also if there is a support through maybe a grant or a loan or guarantee. We need to be ambitious when it comes to our testing and certification facilities, along with a number of mandatory standards for key products that would prevent the import of substandard goods, and make sure that actually we support again our local manufacturers. We're looking to harness our trade policy as much as possible, particularly for exports when it comes to our SEZs, but also our regional collaboration, particularly in the region around the lithium and battery value chains. More broadly, we're looking for other industrial linkages and circularity, particularly with the other master plans, steel, automotive, transmission and distribution, as well as the broader ecosystem. Last but not least, I've said it, industrial development needs to come with inclusive development. We need to drive transformation. And here, fostering the development of emerging suppliers through a transformation fund is critical. Along with this OEM sort of led cluster that I've already mentioned, we need to bring the whole supply chain and value chain together. We need to maximize the contribution of the industry to a just transition by driving some of the activities towards just transition hotspot. That means Mpumalanga, but not just Mpumalanga, let me be clear on this. And drive a more inclusive value chain around decent work, gender inclusivity, and a vast array of other issues. So that is, in a nutshell, what SAREM puts forward. We are hoping to be in a position to launch the master plan very soon, as Philippa indicated. We are in the final stages to really be in a position to do so with government, business, and labor, and of course, drive then implementation going forward. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Galo. Thank you very much. Well done. Good work there. Colleagues, no, thank you very much. And we've come to the end of the scheduled presentations. We'll now start with the panel discussion, and we'll take some questions. And if I may request the three panelists to possibly come onto the platform and put on your webcams. And we will then start with the panel questions. And Galo, right, there we go. We've got the three presenters with us. We have a very good audience that have posted no questions for you for today. So they put the pressure back on us as the team preparing the webinar to bring a few questions to you. And I'll start first in terms of one or two key questions pertaining to manufacturing in this sort of uncertain climate, uncertain policy period. And all three of you spoke about this issue around demand, the consistency of demand. And when we look at the consistency of demand, we also can talk about the consistency of cash flows. Your cash that you need to outlay in investments to build these factories, to get the product to market, and then the delayed flow of revenues back to yourselves. And then the whole issue around consistency of skills. You need time to prepare the people and to prepare the skills. And then once the skills are prepared, to hold on to the skills. This issue of consistency of demand, consistency of cash flows, and consistency of skills. It's very key to growing a successful manufacturing base for South Africa Incorporated. How can we push the policymakers in terms of achieving consistency? How can we do it? What can we do? Who should we go and approach? Whose door should we go and knock upon? And then bring this to the forefront. And any of you, I think all three of you had the consistency theme run through your presentation. How should we do this? In practical terms, who should we go and call? I know I keep calling on the president. I call on just about everybody out there. Come and help, come and help. But we don't seem to be getting that help. We seem to be struggling. Maybe we're looking in the wrong place. Philippa, you want to go first?
Right, I'll give it a...
Go first, go first. How do we do this?
A dash?
Go for it.
Does Mervyn want first, given he presented first?
Philippa, go for it. I'll comment after you.
Prof, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Oh.
Yes, you are.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Mervyn. I'll give it a bash, but you might be able to. Okay. Thanks, Prof. I think the practical. So strategic procurement is an aspect that we are trying to drive. Now, what do I mean by that? In our domestic market, there's two categories of procurement or off-takers. It's really the private sector and it's the public sector. So I'll talk to public sector first, which connects with a lot of work in our Steel Master Plan over the last 18 months. In identifying, the demand side opportunities for projects, that require steel, and it's quite a broad gambit. So from a state procurement perspective, we identified 3 areas. The first being, and it's been in the public domain, the Wella Sizwe Rural Bridges Program. It's a strategic infrastructure project, that in terms of how it's going to be rolled out, requires quite a bit of steel. Eskom transmission lines, those 14,000 kilometers. And then Transnet is also, a significant procurer of items that require steel as an input. In summary, these are important because notwithstanding our focus on export markets, and then also there's private sector procurement, which I won't touch on now, Prof. I just want to talk about public sector procurement and getting practical on that. given that there's sort of quite a low domestic demand, where there are opportunities for public sector procurement, it's really important that we approach those from a strategic procurement perspective. From a policy viewpoint, designation was in place. There's now various iterations of the public procurement bill, which looks to change that quite a bit. And in our work in the Eskom transmission plan to sort of look at, well, from a strategic perspective, if we've got 14,000 kilometers of transmission line, how do we look at that? How do we map that out? How do we make that work? You know, in terms of the specs, the projects plan, etc. We often get stalled because we come across concerns regarding the Competition Act and the PFMA, the Public Finances Management Act. And you know, that makes it quite difficult to have the kind of conversations to really unlock where are those opportunities and how can we do them most practically. So practically speaking, you know, there's quite a lot that can be discussed between industry and state as far as these programs are concerned. So maybe I think sort of a viewpoint that these strategic procurement discussions are important. There is some opportunity and flexibility for those to take place. And where there are concerns around Competition Act, PFMA, there are also ways to solve for those. So I would indicate that's quite important. My second point on that, Prof, and then I'm sure Mervyn will have like maybe more to say as well, is when it does come to large contracts, possibly state procured, you know, those procurements, strategic procurement discussions, also in terms of the contract and the cash flows, are quite important. We have examples of some of our companies, for example, that you know, have quite long lead times for quite complicated pieces of equipment that need to be manufactured, with payment terms by certain state procurers sitting only upon commissioning, and those do have quite significant working capital implications, and it is something that could be sort of looked at from a strategic way as to how to structure those. So that would be my comment, Prof, really in terms of strategic procurement, in terms of government procurement in the domestic market. Thank you.
No, excellent. Thank you for that, Philippa. Mervyn, you want to add to that, or Galo? Mervyn?
Yes, Prof. Okay, so just to add to what Philippa was saying, to me, I think, you know, we've got various policies. You know, we've got product designation, we've got localization policies, and yet when we go out into tender processes, very often those get ignored and not even added into tender documents and that. So for me, I think on the one hand, we need better coordination between various organs of state. And for me, it's about saying, how do we go into this strategic procurement model? And we literally need to join the dots, you know, between all key stakeholders, DTRC, National Treasury, Department of Public Enterprises, you know, and look at how do we bring all parties together to say, if we want to do this project, how do we maximize local content and enforce designation? You know, very often you find there is intent, but you know, there's not any, there's not enabling frameworks and to allow for these things to happen from a strategic procurement perspective. And that, so I think it's about saying, let's literally, how do we join the dots between all of these organizations and look towards an SA Inc. narrative? You know, so for me, when you look at economies that have grown rapidly, and Prof, I'll give you an example. The Chinese economy, when it grew at GDP growth rates of above 10% per annum, what the Chinese did was then they localized. You know, they had local demand, and what they forced is when they went out on state procurement, they forced OEMs to localize. So they leveraged off the demand that was there, and through that triggered industrialization. You know, by forcing OEMs to come and invest in the factories. So effectively what we need is to almost kind of create that enabling framework here from a a procurement perspective, in terms of PFMA and all of that, to say we actually want to, as SA Inc., maximize where we, if we saturate local capacity, then encourage, foreign companies that have capacity to actually build factories in South Africa, to invest into expansion of capacity in the country, employment of local people. And in saying this, the one thing we must be very mindful of, and I think Galo spelled it out quite well, in terms of where's the quick wins and, where's the high risk, high return elements as well. I think, once we say localization, I think we must be mindful of the economic stacking up as well. And sometimes you may not want to localize at 90% or 95%. Maybe you compromise local content, in view of price being competitive. So maybe reduce slightly the percentage of local content requirement, and ensure price competitiveness. Whatever we do, you localize, but the economics also got to stack up. And I think we've got to do this as SA Inc. in partnership with all of the local stakeholders, plus bring on international parties that do have capacity, but force investment and participation into our economy. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mervyn. Thank you. Galo, can you build on that? I liked your comment when you said you had mixed feelings of this $1 billion going offshore. Can you build on Mervyn's last point? Can we force the guys to give us the solar factories here and the wind factories here?
Yeah, and I think that's a really key question. And for me, it takes a lot of different elements to think about. The first is we need to be really clear in terms of what we want to achieve, and that means the design of our scheme, our localization scheme, so to speak, if you want, has to be very clear, and it has to be aligned with the market capacity and what we can actually do and what we can achieve. If it's too low in terms of ambition, then of course it doesn't have an impact. If it's completely out of sync with what's actually being manufactured, there's no point saying we want 100% local content in something we don't make overnight. It's not going to happen. Then, of course, you don't have an impact either, because it's not happening. So it's really important that it is actually in sync with what we have. I think we can be quite also clever in learning from some of the other countries in terms of how they've done it. If you look at what the US has done with the Inflation Reduction Act, yes, don't get me wrong, we cannot afford the same level of support. Okay, we are not the US. That's not what I'm talking about. But the design of the mechanism is really interesting. It supports local project developments, particularly for manufacturing, on a base level. And then if more localization is achieved, more support is provided. If it is located in what they call just transition areas, particularly around former coal mines or coal power stations, then more support is provided. If certain standards are met in terms of employment, then more support is provided again. And so they have this sort of stackable incentive structure, which I personally find very clever, because it really incentivizes companies, manufacturers, project developers to do more, because they want to get more support. They want to receive more support. And so if we are very targeted in that respect, I think we can achieve a lot. Then when we're talking about critical minerals, particularly for the lithium-ion battery value chain, we can work with our neighbors to enforce conditions, but we have to be ready to enforce state-to-company conditionalities and state-to-state conditionalities. It's easy on paper, it's great in theory, but it takes a lot to be able to enforce those conditionalities. There's not a lot of countries historically that have managed to do that. South Korea is one of them, but it is difficult to enforce those conditionalities and say, you will come and deliver what I want if you want access to my minerals, if you want access to my finances, if you want access to my market. So I think we have to be quite upfront about some of the challenges in doing that. Overall, though, you ask, who we kind of need to turn to. Well, on the public side, a lot of the demand is being driven, of course, through the IPP office and the DMRE, and the rules are set there jointly with the DTIC in some cases. Yeah. But also other departments are embarking on large-scale procurement. One of them is DPWI, Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, which from their own calculation, they own 92,000 buildings. Okay, 92,000 buildings, and they've got a program now to roll out 4 gigawatts of renewable energy. That is a substantial program, on government buildings. And so that can be used as anchor demand to support localization. Then we need to support small-scale embedded generation. That falls mostly at the municipal space, jointly with Eskom and the regulator. It is its order to have a degree of localization. It cannot be enforced, and households, when they go and buy a solar system, realistically, they look at price. That's what they look at. So here, the best way to do localization is to make sure that our local suppliers are competitive. And it also comes down then to industrial policy. And that's really important. Similarly, when it comes to the large-scale private sector, it comes to rands and cents, for the private sector. What is the most affordable, product out there? There are, of course, a number of policy obligations, and that can tilt the balance in favor of local manufacturers if the price differential is small. Okay, but if the price differential is big, it's large-scale private sector projects are always going to default to imports. And so again, the main channel is supply side support. Sorry, to make sure that our local manufacturers are competitive and can actually compete on the market. That is the best way to ensure that we get the private sector and households to buy locally. But to do that, the anchor demand from the public sector is critical. It is really critical to allow our local suppliers to ramp up, reach a degree of critical scale. And we can complement that, of course, with our industrial policy, things like the 12I tax incentive, targeted trade-related measures. I know it's always an emotive topic when we talk about things like tariff, but the targeted ones can be useful in some cases. And then we can organically build the ecosystem. So for me, that is sort of the approach that we need going forward.
No, thank you, Galo. Thank you. Well done. Thank you. Now, well done, colleagues. That was good response from the panelists there. First class. We've noted that, and we'll work on that. Colleagues, I want to take you to another thought now, and I want to talk a little bit about diversity. And I always believe in diversity we have strength, right? And I want to talk a little bit about manufacturing. If you consider the strategy of diversification of both product and technology as we go through this phase when we are challenged with powerful externalities. Now, I want to put on the table one powerful externality that is certainly a game changer in our business, and that is global warming, climate change and global warming. Right? That is here, it's going to stay. It's a national, it's a global agenda, and the carbon element, as in coal, oil, and gas, as the Secretary General has pronounced, it's got to stay in the ground. It's as simple as that. So that's a very powerful externality that is coming onto the table, and it's going to disrupt and deindustrialize manufacturing, because you were, as I said earlier in the opening, you were industrialized around steam as the carrier of the energy. But we're now being deindustrialized by this global externality called climate change, global warming. And I subscribe that we must agree with the Secretary General that all carbon elements must stay in the ground. Period. No debate on that. How do we diversify now our base, industrial base, in terms of clean energy resources? And let me take a few examples and then let you open up the conversation there. Firstly, hydro, water. Now, we've successfully built in South Africa pump storage, hydroelectric power stations, Drakensberg, Ingula, Palmit, City of Cape Town, Steenbras. Can we not develop further the pump storage agenda? And pump storage would then be able to give us strength and add to Galo's SARM agenda as an energy storage. Not just batteries, but also pump storage and bulk pumps, bulk energy storage. And again, pump storage would support the intermittency of the renewables being primarily solar and wind. So that's one example, pump storage, diversification of product and technology. And if we could go big into that space. The other area that we could explore and develop further is that of nuclear. Again, it's a clean energy resource. It leaves behind the carbon baggage of global warming, climate change, brings its own baggage, but how can you diversify your product and technology and go in the direction of nuclear, uranium, small modular reactors? And I can assure you in the laboratories of MIT, they've actually got a 10 kilowatt nuclear reactor made up of 10 1 kilowatt nuclear reactors ready to be dispatched. And you don't have to buy it, they'll lend it to you. And they'll lend it to you for your energy requirements, and they'll refuel it every 30 years, 15 to 30 years. And there you will have constant demand, constant supply for your application. So nuclear is another area that we should be exploring and pushing the boundaries. And then number 3 example is that of hydrogen. And you've seen the programs. The European Union is promoting huge investments in terms of hydrogen technology, hydrogen manufacturing, hydrogen production, hydrogen transportation, hydrogen application. And again, how do we deal with hydrogen as another diversified element that we could bring into our mix? So again, I'm saying to you, yes, there's the agenda of deindustrialization that's coming from climate change, global warming drive, but there's also an opportunity to reindustrialize in terms of diversifying product and technology. Your thoughts? Maybe I'll start again with Philippa. Philippa, you're the lady with us today. We give you first go. You go for it, Philippa. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Look, I'll give some responses from a, let's say, manufacturing perspective. I do think that my other panelists, maybe Gail especially, might have some sort of bigger picture strategic views, you know, in terms of the varied mix. Look, I guess my first comment would be that, you know, diversification, I mean, that's connected with, I think, being agile, which is absolutely critical. I mean, we are sort of at this cusp where, you know, the decarbonization requirement is really, really important in terms of us as an economy and sort of globally. So maybe my comments on how we're seeing that sort of pan out, let's say from a manufacturing circle perspective, and then I'll leave it to Gail and possibly move into talk sort of more strategic energy perspective. So look, and again, it's partly in terms of this grid work that we're doing, and also you know, looking at the IRP drafts and various iterations, and that in some instances I think we get quite technology specific, you know, in terms of, is it gas or is it wind or is it nuclear, and then we go down a sort of a technology specific sort of debate. So, you know, and in some instances identifying you know, let's say, a doable mix. I mean, nuclear, it would certainly depend on, you know, the size of the projects, because also it comes back to what is it that we are able to do within our specific environment and fund. I think a similar comment on green hydrogen, which is, I mean, it's very much on our radar. Sort of the understanding, and maybe Gail can talk more to this, is that, you know, if you want green hydrogen, you know, that needs to be powered by renewables. And, you know, in terms of our current gap, in terms of demand and supply, most of the renewable energy build within, you know, the foreseeable future needs to go, well, we need it to fuel our current industry. So I think that maybe the comment I'm making is that in principle, you know, moving towards diversification, moving towards decarbonization is incredibly important. We just see, I suppose, the devil in the detail, and that's why we need to be agile, because at this stage, you know, the just energy transition, how do we do that? Because we do still have most of our sort of electricity mix fired by coal, or driven by coal-fired power stations. So, you know, how does that transition take place, and how quickly, you know, and sustaining some part of the market that could transition while this change is taking place. You know, CBAM and the carbon border adjustment mechanism is something very much on our radar as well, in terms of, you know, how do we sit and what is that going to impact on our steel and aluminium value chain exports to the EU, sort of in the foreseeable future, as maybe a steer. So I guess I'm just throwing out a couple of thoughts and ideas, Prof, without really giving some sort of definitive answer or position in terms of, you know, the need for this agility, and maybe some better answer or visibility as to how we map this out in the short term, going towards a you know, decarbonized future, but like not losing entire industry at the same time. So yeah, maybe more questions than my response.
Thank you, Philippa. No, well done. Good contributions. Mervyn?
Prof, you know, from my side, I think the one thing we've got to acknowledge is the fact that the world is under major disruption, you know, from a technology perspective, when you look at the fourth industrial revolution and all of that, you know, so the world is changing. And I think we as SA Inc. need to adapt to those changes. If you don't adapt, you're going to die, you know, and we've got to actively reinvent ourselves. So on the one hand, I fully agree, climate change and global warming, you know, for me is a reality. It's something that we see with our extreme changes in weather patterns and that. In saying that, however, on the coal side, I think the fact is that when you look at the demand on current on power generation for the country projected into the future, and I think between 2040 and 2050, I think the demand kind of goes up towards 100 gigs and above of generation capacity that's required. You know, if you you know, bring in that scale of generation capacity, you know, granted we're going to have a very good base load element in there. You know, and so you still would need coal for you know, many years. And in my mind, you know, I think the one thing we need to look at is how do we make coal cleaner, you know, by way of whether it be bag filters, electrostatic precipitation, flue gas desulfurization. I think we need to focus on how do we clean the emissions of our existing coal plants, you know, and that can enable also new plants to be built, provided the emissions are clean. So I think coal will remain, you know, with us for some time to still come. But in terms of the points you raised about hydro, nuclear, and hydrogen, I think it's very relevant in South Africa. When you look at hydro, you know, we've got various pump storage schemes. But I think beyond that, you know, there's potential when you look at the network of underground gold mines that are in some cases mothballed. You know, you could potentially. So you must bear in mind that some of these mines, they're still under what is called care and maintenance, where they still pump water out of these mines, and you know, those kinds of things open up the door to, call it, micro pump storage schemes. You know, where we've got existing shafts, and I think we need to look at how do we enable hydro generation out of schemes like that, and there's distinct potential there. On the nuclear side as well, I think we had the pebble bed modular reactor concept that was grown many years ago, and I think that's distinctly a possibility as well. Given the abundance of uranium in the broader region, I think it's definitely an option. That technology is available, and I think the economics stacks up. Obviously dependent on size. And then getting to hydrogen, I think when you look at our renewable energy resources in South Africa for the generation of hydrogen, I think it opens itself and it lends itself towards bankable projects. And for me, when I look at hydrogen fuel cells, and the ability to use the technology onto mining trucks and that, where you move trucks away from diesel to hydrogen fuel cells. When you look at the economics, it reduces the operating cost of mines, and it could resuscitate mining in some areas that was marginal, and where mining has stopped. So I think these technologies, the diversity in that's coming, opens the door to disruption, but more positively, I think it could also enable industries that have been diminishing over the years to be resuscitated when you look at the economics of some of these energy sources and how that could translate into companies making things work that previously were not economically viable. Thank you.
No, excellent. Thank you. Kelo, your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think building on some of the comments that were made, I mean, I often get asked, oh, why do I think about this technology or that technology? Is it good or bad? And my answer is always the same. What I think of a technology is relevant, and what you think of a specific technology is irrelevant. It does not matter. What matters is what drives change, okay, and how you react to this. What we individually think of a specific technology has no impact on what happens in a particular sector. Okay. Globally, there is a transition happening. It is driven primarily by one thing and one thing only: economics. Comes down to price, comes down to rands and cents. It is driving a transition to low carbon systems, particularly renewable energy technologies, which are not, the cheapest on a singular basis. But of course, it's always part of a broader system, a broader mix. It's not going to be one technology. It's always going to be part of a mix. And so for me, we need to see this change as part of the broader mix. In South Africa, we have a starting point, which is very coal intensive. And so that is obviously being displaced. Other countries have different starting points and have other dynamics that they're going through. And so what the current modeling and studies show right now for South Africa is that a mix going forward that sees increasing role for renewable energy and battery storage, and to some extent gas, is the way to go. And that is the current reality today. Where we land in 2035, 2040, we don't know. Okay, the reality may well be different and will then lead to other technologies being put forward. But we need to ask ourselves, what do we need as a country? What does our energy system require? And how do we balance that from an energy security perspective and then from a cost perspective? And that is really the answer that we need to find. I also want to point out something that we often do not talk about, is that the best energy is the one you don't spend. Okay, and so energy efficiency is core to every strategy, and we often neglect this in South Africa. We're still a country that is very energy inefficient. And we've made some progress, primarily driven by price. Industry has had to adjust to fast rising electricity prices, and that has driven a lot of progress in energy efficiency. But there's still a lot more we can do. And that's really critical, because we need to have a system that's efficient, particularly that is cost efficient, because that's the way that then you enable as well other industries to be more competitive. One of the key inputs has to be priced affordably, and increasingly it has to be clean. Period. If you want to have access to finance, access to markets, you need to decarbonize. We can say it's right, we can say it's wrong. Again, it doesn't matter. The point is, it's coming. It's happening. How do we react to this? How do we maintain our access to market and our access to finance is the key question that we have to solve for. Within this, there will be opportunities, no doubt. Lots and lots of opportunities. You mentioned hydrogen. It is the hype of the moment. It can be an opportunity to revitalize certain industries, certainly steel, chemicals, maybe fuel even. It will certainly drive massive demand for renewable energy, because the rules, again, are quite clear. For green hydrogen to be considered green hydrogen, it has to be powered by renewable energy. So there will be opportunities, because South Africa, along with Namibia, has been heralded as one of the key locations worldwide to produce green hydrogen. So for me, we have to take a bit of a step back, on those questions and say, what do we actually need as a country? If one pushes one specific technology, I get worried, to be honest, because it's always part of a broader mix, and we need to look at what's relevant today. Today, we know renewable energy technologies, along with gas and some battery, is really where we need to invest. This may completely change in 10 years' time. I do not know, but we have to really react in our time. And so take a bit of a step back and see what we really need, what we can afford, and where it makes sense for us to invest.
Thank you, Gelo. Thank you for those comments. We agree on the mix, and I think that's where we need to keep the focus on. We keep the mix in focus, and we bring price to the forefront, lowest cost. Colleagues, in terms of, again, in another powerful externality that we want to talk about is this issue about the society itself, the restlessness of society. You find that in our case, with high unemployment, we've got a very, very restless society out there. And again, whatever we promote or develop can all just go up in flames at some time. And social unrest and social instability is virtually in sight. How do we manage this challenge of another externality called the restlessness of society? We're also seeing this in the global context. If you look at Europe, it's all literally under military focus at the moment. Since 7th of October, the Middle East has gone completely unstable, and it's in war mode. And billions of dollars, you could hear it every day on the news, is being channeled to military production, military hardware. How do we fit into this sort of global and local mix? That's a huge challenge for us. How do we work through this haze that's in front of us? As you could see, the call to prayer has commenced. It's almost 1 o'clock. So let's see how best we could answer that. Lupa, you want to try first?
I'll try, Prof. Again, speaking from manufacturing sector and then looking more broadly outwards, and first in our domestic situation. The the incredibly high level of unemployment, even higher stats from a youth employment perspective, how that impacts on society more broadly, to your point, the restlessness, and then also operations more specifically is very, very high on the minds of all of our manufacturers. Some time ago, we looked at an initiative, the Vaal Triangle Rejuvenation Project, given that there are very high areas of informal settlements and high unemployment in those areas across, and that's one of many, to look at steel and petrochemical value chains and sort of the opportunities to well, maybe become more agile and address issues in those areas. So to look at it really in a project-focused way is something that we do try to action. I can also sort of note, and I guess Mervyn may speak to that as well, that as far as a lot of our member companies are concerned, let's say agendas and time, there's a lot of focus outside the factory fence. The manufacturing sector, and I think we saw that quite a lot in COVID, the network and extent of employees and how that extends into the community is quite significant, and areas where I think various companies do apply a lot of focus at a specific company level. But it's something that I do think needs to be assessed in a more systemic way, and it's probably one of the key issues that we are trying to solve for in terms of increasing sort of manufacturing output, providing more jobs, addressing service delivery issues from a municipal perspective, and hopefully addressing those issues. And then my last point, just maybe in terms of the global aspects, I mean, it impacts on our value chains as far as if there's unrest or war happening in another area, what that does for global demand for certain products that we either manufacture for export or look to import. We've got to be quite mindful of that unrest as well, or let's say lack of certainty. And I think on that basis, being agile, being mindful of global value chains, but also not losing our local competencies is quite important. Thanks, Prof.
Thank you. Mervyn?
Prof, I think that's a very interesting point you raised. For me, you can't look at the social element so whether you look at localization, whether you look at energy source, and you always need to look at it holistically from a social perspective as well. So South Africa at the moment, I think, has about 5 gigawatts of rooftop solar. And I think over the past couple of years, we've seen a massive migration of households and commercial to renewables. But there's a distinct social risk with it, where as it stands, the country is one of the most unequal societies in the world. And what happens is that those with the resources then have the ability to install alternative energy sources, but those that do not have it, don't, and sit in the dark. I think we've got to acknowledge the fact that we're living in a country where the unemployment rates are high, the temperature on the ground is rising, and in my view, you can't quell that temperature by just paying people a social income grant, 350 rands a month. For me, it's about saying, I think at the moment the stats are such, the economics are such that I think about 7 or 8% of our population pay about 90% of our personal income tax. So what it talks to is that it's got we live in a society where the majority of our population are not economically active, so the reality is whatever we do, we've got to acknowledge the fact that inequality is growing. The haves have all the they've got electricity, they've got water, the have-nots have got nothing, and it's growing. And in my mind, instead of us relying on people getting a social income grant, whatever we do, it has to be inclusive, whereby you create opportunities for employment. You've got to skill people that skills are aligned with where demand is. And you bring those people into the economically active population. They start paying taxes. The companies that they work for pay taxes. And all of these things help towards stimulating GDP growth. And for me, that's the fundamental, and it's not something you can ignore. On the one hand, you can say, that the economics doesn't stack up on localization. Let's import. And in that scenario, inequality grows, and it is just not sustainable for society. And we see it, where people get desperate, and you get community unrest. So at the end of the day, I think it's something we fundamentally need to address, but do it holistically. Whatever we do, we've got to be inclusive to look at all elements, including the social element. Thank you.
Great. Kalo, your final comment as we wrap up.
Yes, thanks. I'll be brief because I know we've just hit 1 o'clock, and these are big questions. But I think two thoughts on the global level. I think we do need to look very carefully at certain areas where we need to make sure we have our own capacity. We've seen the global value chain disruptions that can happen, linked to COVID-19, of course, but also other processes, when there are some supply shortages in some sectors. And so in some cases, it is a case of build your own, and so that the economy can carry on and function. And I think we need to look at certain industries and say, maybe we should actually have our own capacity for South Africa or for the region, and even if it's not 100% competitive, we should support it and have it domestically, and make it competitive over time. So I think that is really important. I think it's there are some strategic considerations to also building localization. It's not just sometimes about what we should be doing. And then I think on the local fronts, I think Philippa and Mervyn have said it better than I can. It's about creating jobs, and here we see the opportunities. Actually, globally, we are quite a competitive location to invest in. If you look at global studies, and so the ability for the economy to grow relies on a number then of domestic interventions that we can put forward. And for me, that is the crux of the matter. If we can tap into those new opportunities, that, as I've tried to demonstrate, renewable energy is one of them, then we can create a much needed job in the country, and dynamize our various industries. So for me, let's look at where we are competitive, where we need to be competitive, and invest in those industries rather than to try and do sometimes a bit too much. And if we're more focused, then we can build the right industries for South Africa, and then create the much needed jobs that we need in the country. I'll leave it at this. Thank you.
Now, first class. Thank you, Galo. Thank you. Colleagues, we've used up our full allocated 2 hours. Well done. Thank you to our panelists for your presentations and for your panel discussion. It's come out very, very well. The copy of the recording will be made available on the SAIEE YouTube channel. Minx, our boss, is going to launch a survey at the end of this panel. Colleagues, attendees, kindly help complete the 4 questions in the survey, and this will be highly appreciated from the production team. And over to you, Minx. I will sign out now. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you very much. Bye-bye. Over to Minx, our boss, our coordinator.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you for being our SAIEE representative. And on behalf of ACTOM and of the SAIEE, actually, Mr. Mervyn Naidu, thank you very much for availing yourself. Ms. Philippa Rothseth from Manufacturing Circle, and Galo Montmason-Clare from TIPS, thank you so much for your time. I know it's been 2 hours. I know we've just gone over time. So at the end of the webinar, ladies and gentlemen, there'll be a quick survey, just 4 questions. We ask you your input because we want to bring you great content going forward. your input is really valuable. I thank you all for a lovely day further, and please stay safe. Goodbye.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.